Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the first ever Canadian Open Data Society webinar. And we thought we would start our very first ever webinar talking about building a career in open data. Open data is this growing field, this growing space, but how do we build a career in it? And we're very fortunate to have a very incredible group of people who've been very successful at building a career in open data join us here today to talk a bit about their journey, how they built their career, and how you can pass on advice about how each of you have an opportunity or ideas of how you could build your own career in open data. So thank you so much for joining us today. First things first, I'll start by moving to the next slide. So this is our agenda for today. I'm going to talk a bit about the Canadian Open Data Society, and then I'm going to pass it over to Jake, our co-lead on this from LinkedIn. And Jake's going to give some advice about how you can build your career, some tips and tricks. And then from that, we're going to dive into discussions from our panelists who will speak about their own journey as well as passing on tips. Following that, we'll have some discussion where panelists and moderators will be able to sort of ask some Q&As. And then from there, we'll turn over to you, the audience, and take your questions and any questions you have about to our panelists and to myself and to Jake about how you can build your career in open data or any questions about our own journeys. And then from that, we'll talk about sort of some follow-up actions we can take and then wrap it up. So let's get started. All right. Oh yes, disclaimer. So as I mentioned, this is sort of our boilerplate disclaimer we put out there. As I mentioned as well, we're going to be recording this. This is going to be going on the Canadian Open Data Society website. So yes. All right. So we are the Canadian Open Data Society. We are a brand new organization. We just launched last month. And we came together as an organization really serve for a couple of key goals. First and foremost, we came out of the Canadian Open Data Summit. And the Canadian Open Data Summit is this organization, this event that happens annually, really about building and strengthening open data and the use of open data in Canada. It brings together practitioners and advocates from all sorts of different places within the sector to share stories, success stories about how we're using open data well to transform society, but also to sort of strategize and really support each other in growing this movement and really bringing about open data as a force for good in the world. So with that summit was building momentum, we decided that there's a need for an organization both to support the continued ongoing growth of the summit, and we're very excited that we'll be doing, after a year off because of a pandemic, that we'll be doing the summit in 2021, and so there'll be details coming out shortly about that. But we thought, beyond just the summit, this idea of building a movement around open data is much bigger and broader than just the summit. And so this organization has been created around this vision of building open data in society. So here's our vision: to make Canada a global model of a genuinely open society, one that empowers and improves the lives of its people, one that freely publishes, gives access to, and uses high quality open data in all areas. And so as an organization, we're going to be looking for all sorts of different opportunities to build this movement for open data in Canada. We're going to be doing stuff like these events, like this webinar, as well as finding all sorts of other ways that we can sort of build and strengthen the movement. We're here to try to help all of you who are interested in really growing open data in Canada. And so we try to hope to find all sorts of different ways around awareness, around advocacy, and around sort of bringing people together and building that community together. So that is what the Canadian Open Data Society is all about. I think at this point, I'm going to pass it over to you, Jake. And why don't you, I'm going to stop sharing my screen here for a second and let you sort of speak so we can see your face. And why don't you talk a bit about yourself and some tips you have for how people can build a career in open data.
Happy to do so, and I'll turn that crazy background off for a minute or two to allow folks to actually focus. But do let me know if you want me to bring it back. There was, as usual, chatter. I again, can't take credit for it, but I'm in my tenant's home, so I figure it was more representative of my identity than either the suit or the furniture behind me. And yet, maybe that's a good introduction to a conversation about what open means. I love that Derek broadened it from open data to open society. I think that the two are integrally linked, and in fact, ethical and open could also arguably be linked in ways that tech has not necessarily taken us to date. Certainly, I don't represent all of the views of the companies that I currently work for. So my name is Jake Allen. I run workforce development and higher education systems for LinkedIn across North America, which of course is owned by Microsoft. And I have been very close to, if never at the heart of, the open data community for almost a decade now. So I'm super excited to be here co-hosting today My remarks are actually going to focus more on tips around how to use LinkedIn and how to get a job. I'll let the moderators focus on the subject matter at hand because they're all, sorry, I'll let the panelists, they are far more expert than I am at everything open data. And in fact, have also, I think, created more open data either themselves or through their relationships and organizations than I have. So I commend them, I applaud them for having done so, and I'll leave the details to them. But for my part, I figured I'd give you a quick overview of my career to date and how it relates to open data, and then spend a few minutes on some tips. So again, why me? LinkedIn, not exactly a bastion of open data, although I have been fighting for much of the past 5 to 6 years to have it open up as much as possible. And honestly, I've seen the most progress since our most recent acquisition by Microsoft and their acquisition thereafter of GitHub. I've had a number of really interesting conversations recently about how that's going to impact the future of both LinkedIn's data and Microsoft's data. And while I can't get into any of those details right now, I am excited for a more open future for my core employer. That said, I do a lot of things on the side, and I've had a pretty wandering career to get here. I'm on the boards of the Canadian Club of ICTC. I advise everything from Kids Code Jeunesse to Lighthouse Labs, which I of course founded. And these days I spend most of my time on workforce development, on helping unemployed people get jobs, which might be helpful in the open data community as well. So the quick story of how I've been tied to open data starts really in intellectual property law, where I was a huge advocate of Creative Commons. I continue to be, and I actually think the legal underpinnings of open data are often understated. So happy to sort of insert that into the conversation later if we don't get there. Also wanted to mention that I founded Hacking Health, and when I was running a software development shop, built some things like Vote Compass, Canly, even an open source electronic medical record software called Oscar, all of which I think have furthered open data in Canada and really furthered different civic tech related communities to the point where these days my partner is on the board of directors for Code for Canada. I have been a founding advisor of Code for Canada, and I think that it too has done a lot for open data in Canada, and happy to speak to that later in the conversation. Finally, these days, the stuff I do that's most relevant relates to skills. So for instance, I work a lot with a company called Brighthive, which is arguably the foremost data trust creator in the US, focused on skills and jobs and that kind of stuff. Labor market information is the technical term. And I founded a related organization called the International Council on Badges and Credentials. Again, really pushing for skills-based hiring and more transparency around badges, credentials, getting away from degrees and certificates and pieces of paper. And that has been related to a broader movement in the US that's led by something called the Open Skills Network. So with that as background, I'll jump into some tips. And this section is really based on my experience. 5, 6 years at LinkedIn, you get to know how to apply for jobs, how to network. In fact, people joked for many years before I joined LinkedIn that I was jaked in because I like networking so much. It's obnoxious to a point, but these days it's come in handy because everybody's networking online. And so the first thing I wanted to say in terms of how to network online is that you have to be even more ballsy, to be frank. You have to be even more gregarious or extroverted than you would be otherwise. I think for some introverts or ambiverts, that's actually been easier because you don't have to, put yourself out there physically or in person in the same way you would have to otherwise. But nevertheless, bear in mind that there are a lot more people networking on LinkedIn now than there ever were, that, in the breakout sessions of conferences, you're going to have people being perhaps more aggressive than they would have in the past. And therefore, you're going to have to position yourself well vis-a-vis a larger audience. Another sort of tip in terms of profiles is people actually are looking at LinkedIn profiles now more than they were in the past. So make sure, whether it's on LinkedIn or on some other platform, that you do represent yourself in the way that you'd want to online, because your online representation, for better or worse these days, is the only representation that a lot of people are going to see. I am in lockdown here in Toronto, Canada, and not leaving this house very often. So this is how people see me or vis-a-vis my LinkedIn profile. The last thing in terms of actually filling out that profile is a few tips based on what we know people look at on profiles. So for instance, they always look at multimedia. It sucks. People shouldn't be judged based on their photographs. They certainly shouldn't be judged based on their name or ethnicity or anything like that. But unfortunately, multimedia is where the eye goes. And so you want to have as much of it on your profile as possible. You want to be linking to websites and projects, have people actually dig into who you are via that profile instead of just having text on there. And then the text has to actually be based on things like skills and experiences. It should be as specific and constructive as possible. It basically has to be what you want a recruiter to search for in order to find you. It's pretty straightforward, but it's remarkable how infrequently people draft their profiles that way. They draft it like a resume, which wasn't, interestingly, originally designed that way. The last part that I'll go into a little bit of depth on relates to introductions. Again, these days, you got to make them online. You got to ask for them. And sort of the coffee chat, when I talk about a coffee chat, this is what I'm talking about, right? A Zoom call, even just a phone call. For those of us who spend way too much time on video, I would often offer the phone call because I am very grateful when somebody who's asking for a job or asking for an introduction suggests it, just because of Zoom fatigue. Once you do ask for that call, the key is to take as most advantage of the 10, half hour, hour that you have with the person in order to get other introductions from them in a soft, easy manner. I would not go into a call asking for a job, and I also wouldn't even go in asking for introductions. Instead, you want to go into that call asking to get to know the person. You want to be able to add value to them. So if you can, even in asking for that original coffee chat, set it up so that you are there both at their service and can provide X, Y, and Z of interest to them, usually just conversation subjects, and you make sure that you have enough questions for them that they are never bored or have to lead the conversation. If somebody's asking me for something, I don't want to have to think about where to go next in the conversation. So have the conversation all set up for them. And here's a really specific tip on how to make it easy for them then to make introductions. Draft the introductions for them, which is to say, I've left a coffee chat with Michael. He said I should talk to these 6 organizations related to Ajah and open data. I then take that list of people and I draft 6 emails to Michael. And the emails start with, hi, Michael, you mentioned you'd be open to introducing me to this person. If you still are, I've drafted the introduction from you to them for me. Here it is. If not, no problem. Is there anything else you'd want to tell me about them? If not, no problem. Thank you for getting to here. Thank you for meeting with me. That way you make it super low touch, super easy. And if they do want to make the introduction, they can do it in about 5 minutes, which will again increase the likelihood of it. So with that, I'll probably stop rambling. I'm happy to speak to sort of any of the other aspects of my career that I didn't touch on during this conversation later on. I will try to spend most of the conversation focused on those who actually know about open data, which is to say our panelists. I'm going to throw my LinkedIn profile into the chat. Feel free to add me on LinkedIn, but last tip, you have to tell me that you were here. Why? Because people add me all the time on LinkedIn, and I'm actually relatively open to new connections. No judgment if you just want to connect with people who you've actually met in person or do work with. But for those who are open like me, I still want to know that I know you. And so when you hit connect, feel free to do so, but let me know that you're on this call. And with that, I'll turn it back to Derek.
So actually, Jake, there's actually a question in the chat specifically on that question of like, do you add people to LinkedIn that you don't know?
It's a great question. In my case, I have to have had some contact with them, and I have to not be worried that they're going to have a negative impact on my network. So if they've emailed me, if they've been on a call with me, you know, I give webinars for hundreds of thousands of people. There's a ton of my connections that I don't actually know. As long as I know how I was connected to them, that's usually sufficient for me, and they aren't going to be a negative spammy influence on my network. But it's entirely up to you. Some people just add people they have been in a full-time job working with, and that is entirely reasonable as well. It's a reflection of who you are, and that's what our online presence should be more generally.
Thank you so much, Jake. I realized I forgot to introduce myself. Hi, everyone. I'm Derek Alton. By day, I work for the Canadian government in sort of the digital government space. How can government more effectively use technology to provide better services and create a better world? And by night, I am an advocate for all things open, trying to build a more open society. And one of those roles is as president of the Canadian Open Data Society. So that's who I am in a nutshell. I also realized that I completely forgot to do a land acknowledgement and my excitement to get going. So I do want to take a moment now to sort of think, you know, in Canada, we are on all sorts of different territories of all sorts of different communities and groups. Now, I know each of us is sort of positioned in a different place and potentially on different treaty lands or non-treaty lands for different groups. So I think maybe the best way to do this is actually just to take a moment to just pause. And I encourage everybody to sort of think and reflect about the land that you're on, the history of that land, and how you can be sort of a force for reconciliation in your daily life. So I'm going to give sort of 30 seconds of silence for all of us to just sort of think about that, and then we'll jump back into the event. Thanks, everyone. All right, so let's jump into the panelists. So we're very fortunate to have sort of 3 panelists with us here today, who each have a lot of experience building careers in open data in completely different spaces. You know, a person in government, a person in civil society, and a person who's played a role both in government and civil society. So we're very, very appreciative and fortunate to have 3 people with us here, and I'll do a sort of quick introductions, and then we'll kind of hand over Michael to you first. First we have Michael. So Michael is a leader in the area of data, and Michael, I just took this right off of your LinkedIn profile, just so you know. Michael is a leader in the area of data use for social impact. He has been working in the area of public interest technology since 1999. In 2003, he founded the Ile Sans Fil community wireless group, now operating over 1,000 public hotspots in the Montreal area, which is a really cool project, by the way. Definitely check it out. Working in open data since 2005, he has co-founded national, provincial, and municipal lobby groups, as well as coordinated numerous hackathons on issues such as sustainability, corruption, and government's procurement. He is a frequent collaborator on academic community partnerships, and he serves on several not-for-profit boards and advisory groups related to technology, democracy, and civil society. Michael is currently the CEO of Ajah, an online fundraising research service for the Canadian not-for-profits. In 2013, Ajah founded Powered by Data, a nonprofit initiative helping nonprofit access information critical to their missions. So actually, Michael, why don't I just hand it right over to you now and let you jump in, and I'll introduce everybody else as they come.
Sounds great. This is fun. This is great. I'm very happy to be part of the inaugural, you know, some of the inaugural activities of the Canadian Open Data Society and Open Government Society. So thanks for the hard work of getting this going, and I'm really happy to support this work of our community. There's lots of smart people on the call, a bunch of people that I recognize. I don't think I have a ton of special advice. I'll just quickly go through my own career path, and then I just want to focus more on the conversation that we can have afterwards. I'm as you said, I'm the CEO of a company called Ajah that I co-founded in 2010, and Ajah started a nonprofit that's now exists on the TIDES platform, which is now called Make Way. They changed names, and that's Powered by Data. I'm also, I guess, relevant to this, the co-chair of the Multi-Stakeholder Forum of Open Government, which is a forum that Canada is part of as part of our adherence or membership in the Open Government Partnership, the Multi-Stakeholder International Initiative. So there's a working group that sits at the federal level. Jean-Noé was involved with me in helping to create it, and helping to set it up, and just recently stepped down from the forum. I learned about open government back in 2003. I had the chance to be at a conference through the work that I was doing with community wireless stuff. I was at a conference in the UK, and I got exposed to the Public Whip and They Work For You, which were really exciting projects happening back in the day, and wanted to bring some of those, that practice back to Canada. And it was hard, back in 2005, 2006, doing that. The only funder that I was aware of that was funding open government stuff was Soros, and Soros' foundation doesn't fund Canada very much, even though they are now funding some things like the extractive transparency initiative here in Canada. So I needed to, pay my own way in open government or in open data. And so after a bit, I started a company called Ajah. I found some co-founders, and I'm not a developer myself, so I needed people that could actually do the work of development, software development. And I knew about a need for data from my background in the nonprofit sector, trying to find out who you should ask for grants or who you should try to get funding from. There's a lot of social or human intelligence in that, and as a geek, I didn't like the fact that you had to, maintain a serious social network in order to access this information. I thought it would be, I thought not that should be the case for everything, but for this type of information, it seemed that there shouldn't be so much gatekeeping around it, that the information should flow a bit more freely. So I started a company that offers, based on open data, we track who funds who, and we sell that information to fundraisers. And so we've been doing that since 2010. And, right off the bat, you're going to, so I'll leave it there. Ajah started Powered by Data, a nonprofit, in 2014. And that's when we thought there'd be more of a market for foundations to be investing in open data, for more explicit kind of appropriation of these tools and policies by the nonprofit sector. And still, 2020, we have 10 employees at Ajah and 1 full-time equivalent at Powered by Data. So it kind of gives you a sense of where we've been able to discover opportunities. There's still not a lot of opportunities as far as we see for open data necessarily. There's also opportunities to help and to make a difference, but not a lot of funding for open data in the philanthropic sector. Just moving forward. Ajah, we started out as a SaaS company. We've had a bunch of success in that, but certainly, we never managed to hit our revenue targets that we had in our business plan. In case anyone, I think that happens for some people, but for a lot of people, that's obviously the plan isn't actually what happens in the world. So we had to do a lot of consulting along the way, offering our service. Consulting is, you're supposed to not want to do it because you have to work for your money, as opposed to SaaS services. It's easier, and it's you can kind of, this idea of sitting back, letting the money roll in. But obviously consulting is really rewarding work if you can help people with their problems and solve them. It's extremely gratifying. So mainly now Ajah is, I'd say, 9/10 or more than 3/4 consulting company and 1/4 software as a service company. And we get to do really cool consulting gigs with groups like the MasterCard Foundation that's located in Toronto, which is the 3rd biggest foundation in the world, doing information architecture for them, doing the information architecture with the virtual CTO for, thanks Derek, for Giving Tuesday, which is the international movement to increase giving, which is happening this Tuesday. So hopefully you'll all support that. And just different things, different problems that people have around, how do we collect information from homelessness providers when there's 5 to 20 homelessness service providers per city, and what does it mean to collect information from those organizations, and how do you make that happen in a way that is equitable and suits everyone, different stakeholders' needs. So just the advice I'd say is that for open government, for open data, there's lots of opportunities, but getting people to fund the opportunity that you see, I don't see that happening very much. If you can bring open data as a solution to people's problems, that's where I'm seeing a lot of, that's where you can actually get work to happen. So basically, as Powered by Data, we're not very successful at getting grants to do the kind of work that we want to do about making data more available, but we're very successful at getting contracts to solve people's problems and using the information architecture and skills and the lessons around how do you move data to the places where it can actually make a difference. So that's my advice, is that you bring the skills of programmatic thinking and architecture stuff. And if you can phrase it in such a way that it can actually solve people's problems. But there's a lot of work in between seeing a technical vision and actually persuading people that it can be implemented and should be implemented. And so I'll leave it there, I guess, but excited for the conversation.
Thanks so much, Michael. So if you have questions for Mike, hold your questions. You can put them in the chat. We'll keep an eye on the chat as well. And we'll be getting back to Michael with all these questions. Val, you are next. All right. So Val is a hopeful bureaucrat, a rebel with a cause, and a cultivator of gravity-defying hair, which is very true. She has spent most of her career working on change and digital transformation initiatives in government, with a current focus on skill recognition and portable credentials, #verifiable credentials. Val currently serves as the lead of the talent mobility strategy for an experimental staffing platform called GC Talent Cloud, a project-based marketplace for Canada's public service, a potential global first for the public sector. Val's main area of focus is on humanizing human resources and reimagining a new credential recognition ecosystem to attract and recognize talent for Canada's public service in the digital age. Val, have I made you? You are co-host. Excellent. So you can just share your screen, and you've got a presentation for us.
Yes. And what I realized
just a reminder,
is
5 minutes. Just a reminder.
I'm sorry?
Just a reminder, 5 minutes.
Oh, 5 minutes. Yes. Okay, cool. Thanks for that. Yes, and that also tells me that I probably need to whittle down that bio a little bit. That was really long. Cool. But thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here. I want to make sure you see the screen appropriately. That's a yes. Cool. Great. So I'm just going to put this on full screen here. So thank you so much. So very excited to be here today to share a little bit about this project GC Talent Cloud. As Derek mentioned, this is a very kind of small rogue project contained within the Treasury Board Secretariat of Canada. So we are a government project in the Treasury Board as part of the digital change unit. But what I wanted to show today is how you can operationalize a project. And I think to what Michael was saying, the idea of demonstrating what is possible in using open data as part of, so people can actualize it and see it in a tangible way. This points to some of the work that we're doing here at GC Talent Cloud. So I'm just going to go through very quickly what the problem is that we try to address with GC Talent Cloud. So just on the point of skills, so we talk a lot about the public service being an agile workforce, but if we are not able to see and trust the skills, what it is that people are capable of, we cannot respond to these emerging needs. Public service has a lot of barriers to entry. So if any of you are on the line that have ever tried to apply for a government job, you will know that there's a lot of hoops and hurdles that you have to get through. Things like, they will always say, a lot of times about having a post-secondary degree, you must have 5 years experience writing briefing notes. The idea that information is disconnected in multiple systems. So once you even get through the gate, the information is in all these different silos. So it doesn't interoperate, which means that the whole system has to re-verify time and time again. So, if you need a post-secondary degree, you show it to somebody once, and I mean physically show it. So it's like taking it off the wall and having it to bring it to an HR person for them to like visually look at it and say, yes, thank you, you've passed the verification. Not really the best way to have a trusted credential. So we're really about trying to tackle some of these systemic issues. So reducing barriers of entry to be more inclusive public service, to allow people to claim more totality of their skills, and to really look at this whole interoperability of data piece. Again, just speaking more to the point of, in order for government to keep pace, people are more than their job description. So whatever title you have, that is not the totality of you and what it is that you're capable of. And we really want to break down these barriers. And to highlight on this diagram, the reason for this is also being able to mobilize and restructure rapidly. So we know when COVID hit, we scrambled. And as a government, we went from having this massive digital infrastructure long-term plan, and we turned it around like in 3 weeks. 250,000 people were working from home overnight. And when we had to move talent quickly, being able to find the talent, the skills that we needed to be responsive to those critical needs became ever more apparent. So Talent Cloud, very briefly, is really a platform, a staffing platform that is project-based to try to address this. We are skills-based, so to emphasize that it's not about the degree that you have necessarily, it's not about the years of experience, it's really about being able to speak to the totality of your experiences in a way that employers can understand. We have created this project. These are our digital standards, which was issued by the Treasury Board Secretariat. What I want to emphasize here is the fact that using open data standards and solutions, and also working in the open by default. So our project, our platform, GC Town Cloud, is actually on GitHub. So we've opened up everything, and everything that I'm going to speak to now is how we've incorporated these open standards and solutions around skills. These are just some things that makes Talent Cloud a little bit different. We really focus on reducing the staffing time, which goes to the trying to address the re-verifications of data, and really emphasizing here, because we are more regionally digitally distributed, this really allows for a greater talent pool for us to access. And one of the things I'm going to touch upon very, very quickly is what we're trying to do with this new skills and competency recognition methodology. Oops, I think I way over. So this is at very high level. Jake mentioned this earlier on. Jake and I cross paths in quite a few different contexts, but I wanted to emphasize the work that is being done out of the Open Skills Network. So this is a global initiative that is really about trying to surface the infrastructure to have skill-related data interoperate. This is our very high level early draft of what a skills architecture is. So really looking at the things around, these are the occupational skills that you need, but these are all the transferable skills that will apply to multiple jobs. So again, you're more than your job description. So the more that we can start surfacing the skills that are transferable, so whether that's collaboration, things like communication, things like complex problem solving, the more we're able to identify these transferable skills, the more talent opportunity there is for mobility. This is just a nod to the fact, again, that through this assessment ascent, so when people are invited to go through a hiring process, 100 people get invited, they submit their application. Out of that, only so many are going to make through that initial screen-in process. Only so many of those are going to pass the exam, and you just keep going through all these different hurdles. And the end state is that only one person gets the job. But all the people that have demonstrated their skills along the way end up with nothing. And so what we're trying to bring value to is that if we can start recognizing that if a person has demonstrated, a skill in Python as part of their exam, irrespective of whether or not they end up getting the job, we should acknowledge the fact that they have demonstrated that skill for that assessment.
Eva, I'm just going to do a quick time check, 30 seconds.
Yeah. Cool. So really the last piece I want to share is what we're doing to this point is really testing this interoperability with verifiable skill records that really allows us to retain that skill data that can be verified and withheld within an individual's quote unquote digital wallet, where it can then be shared with anyone they choose. So this idea of having self-sovereign data principles, giving more ownership to the individual, and creating trust within the employment and employers and employment opportunities. And this is really what the vision is. All of this is anchored in open standards, and that if we can get this right, it's not about building this in silos. This is not just for government. It's about creating an ecosystem that allows interoperability of skill-related data within private, nonprofit, academia, and public sector, where we're all working and anchored in open data and open standards. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Val. I really like your point about the importance of skills and really framing things around skills. I think that's very much where our world's going. All right, Ira, I have you next. All right. So Ira has done a whole bunch of different things.
Ira, but sure.
Oh, is it? Sorry, Ira. I keep.
It's right there.
You even sent me a message correcting me. This is terrible.
I do keep correcting you, but I'll keep going. Anyway, go.
You do. So Ira has done a whole bunch of different things. Leads standards and interoperability work at NHSX. NHS is a National Health Service here in the UK. At a digital native and expert on standards, open data, data platforms, privacy, and decentralized technology. She's interested in how we use the technology for good. She co-founded Redecentralize, led the CKAN open source data platform, which is what most governments in Canada use for open data, to international adoption while delivering data.gov, data.gov.uk. and serves on Open Knowledge Seniors Management Team and now as a board member, and developed a personal data infrastructure program within the UK's government digital service. She's developed national and federal policy regulations, commercial and technological frameworks for citywide information marketplaces, and has led the UK's first data trust pilot for the Open Data Institute. Take it away, Ira.
Amazing, good. Actually, is it evening in Canada? Maybe it's not. Anyway, in London it's evening, so good evening. And I'm kind of coming towards. Well, actually, it's still kind of middle of the workday. It's only almost 6 p.m. You know, there's still hours left in the day. But I apologize in advance if I look exhausted. It is because I am. Things are quite busy in the NHS at the moment. Anyway, so I'm Irina Bolychevsky, or Shevsky on the internet, and I actually got involved in open data sort of in 2011, so about a decade ago, and really sort of quite by accident, just so unintentional that it's almost funny. I was working for a startup in London and just getting so fed up with some of the bullshit of being the only woman in the company that was sort of looking for an out. And a friend of mine was saying, I know this really crazy guy. Look, I don't know, but I think you can help him. It might vibe. Send me your CV. Anyway, a few months go by. I quit the startup, thank God. And I get this call just out of nowhere, and there's this man just like asking me questions about my mathematics and philosophy degree to an astonishing level of detail. And I'm like, who is he? What is happening? And eventually I sort of catch up to figure out that he runs an organization. He's probably trying to hire me. He then lists a whole range of projects and then says, which one are you most interested in? And being put on the spot like that, I just repeated the last thing he said, and that was CKAN. And then a few days later, I ended up finding myself product owner of CKAN. So CKAN is an open source open data platform, and as Derek said, it's used all over the world now by governments, but also organizations actually use it. I've just found out today that most of the NHS uses it. And at the time, it didn't have a website, it didn't have a front end. It was just a sort of, a kind of package manager with a solar index and a Postgres database. And people were like, well, we're doing some stuff, and we're the back end of this data portal. And that's how I got into open data. I think a few months after that, the guy who hired me, the team lead, quit, and suddenly I was in charge. And so for better or for worse, I'm the reason CKAN looks the way it does. I still can't believe the interface hasn't changed since I sort of set up a little guerrilla team and redesigned the information architecture and sort of redesigned it in secret because we didn't really have much money. And I'm also the reason that it's ended up being a government sort of open data portal, because that was where I thought is the kind of tangible first thing to do. But the thing that was amazing, and the thing that I just got instantly, was this sort of open data movement. And it was partly because I think my first day of work was turning up at Open Knowledge Con. So I was working for Open Knowledge Foundation, for anyone who was back around in those days of My Society and Public Whip. And they had an international community that was actually really active and really incredible. And lots of projects like School of Data, Data Literacy, Open Spending, Open Data Handbook, PyBoss. I mean, there were like hundreds, and each one had their own website. And the thing that really landed for me wasn't just sort of the importance of open licensing and kind of actually what, open data is not just data that's on the web, it's data that you have a right to do things with. But also the kind of the culture of doing things as a community, of being part of stuff, that kind of small pieces loosely joined, not just let's have a monopoly, let's own something. It's like there's space for lots of people to collaborate and coordinate. And the kind of idea and the mentality of many eyes, and there's a few variations of this sort of way of thinking. It's like, to many eyes, all bugs are shallow and sort of open source, or to many eyes, all problems can be solved. And I think there's, I'm sure, many talks on the internet by Rufus and others that are very inspiring and tell beautiful stories about the importance and role that open data can play. And the thing that was great was, you know, we had like this movement and community. At the time, governments didn't get it at all. So you had civil servants turn up to sort of one type of event, the kind of activist hackers at another type of event. And through the years, the two sort of groups started to interact, and it was a beautiful, beautiful experience. So to kind of bring this back to, well, what would I look for? And, you know, what does that mean now in kind of open data careers? And fundamentally, I think when I look to hire people to do open stuff, like I'm actually going to be hiring an open tech lead soon. You know, the thing that I would like is people not just to kind of understand the kind of the formality of maybe what open data technically means or what open data exists, but a little bit of what it means to use data, what it means to collaborate, to do things in the open. I loved what kind of value your sort of open standards and digital principles. I think that's so important, and it's those kind of principles and ways of thinking that's actually really key. And you know, back when I was still working in this space, primarily, you know, I really struggled to get governments to kind of not just publish open data as a kind of box ticking exercise at the end of a long process, completely disconnected from, you know, the creation or the management or maintenance of data. Because that's not actually how you connect and have a feedback mechanism. It's not how you transform data management. It's not how you really shift, you know, when we create and maintain data, how do we do it for purposes other than our own? How do we start thinking in a more inclusive, collaborative way of this could be infrastructure. This could be a foundation for many other people's efforts or work, whether it's research or innovation or transparency. And I think some of that kind of tangible experience, getting involved in those communities, trying to do stuff with data and seeing the power of what's possible by working in the open and kind of getting lots of minds together, I think for me is the key thing. Derek, have I gone over my 5 minutes? Pretty much. Well, anyway, so that's it from me. And obviously, if anyone has any questions, happy to answer.
Brilliant, thank you, Ira. Okay, so now we're going to move into question section here. We are a bit tight on time, so I'm going to just kind of combine all question time period together. So if you have questions, put the questions in the chat and we'll sort of bring them to the group. One of the questions I kind of have for the panelists to start things off is, it sounds like a lot of you did a lot of work volunteering in the open data space and doing stuff on the side, and there's almost like this moment where you kind of get your foot in the door. So I guess it's almost like the foot in the door piece. How do you get your foot in the door in work in the open data space, whether it's in government or in the not-for-profit space? What allows you to get your foot in the door in the space, and what advice would you have for people listening to this about how they can get their foot in the door? Any volunteers to go first?
I mean, I can jump just very quickly. So what I would say is, for us, my advice would be really is about, it's the demonstration piece. So I think regardless sometimes of what your job is, you will never be defined just by the job. There will always be opportunities and you know, ways to collaborate with other entities. And I think this is the world that we are living in. It's being able to just get your foot in the door, regardless of what it is, and then finding your community once you're in. And I think you know, this is a prime example, but being able to show people what is possible, you know, the power behind this data is, you know, using open standards and open data is key, but just getting your foot in the door, I think is really the first point. Regardless of what the role is, you're not defined by that.
I would say, like, there's a lot of power still for now in blogging or tweeting or kind of keeping up with events, because there's a lot of things that are constantly happening, and actually there's always an open data take on them. There's always data that's relevant that you can look and kind of combine, comment on, you know, sort of open up a little community to collaborate with. And I think that's a really good way to tangibly demonstrate your ability to kind of grasp the power and possibility of data, and, you know, and also actively have a reason to look at where it exists. And I think that shows all of the kinds of skills that actually, when governments or others are hiring kind of open data leaders, advocates, or whoever else are looking for.
And yeah, for me, it was a combination of being terrible at school, and so dropping out and failing out of university, and having, you know, being able to find different geek communities that I was able to participate in. So, you know, not to belabor it, but obviously the lots of geek spaces, especially in 2003, super white, not accessible to rural people as much as urban people, and pretty male, so that felt perfectly natural to me, but I don't imagine that for everyone else it would be the same experience. So yeah, but luckily I think there's groups like Open Heroines. There's different groups that are, even in Toronto, there's a POC initiative run by, I'll put it in the chat, the name, but finding those spaces where you're interacting with people that are professionals. That's all.
Maybe one last point just to tie all three together, which is that open data exists everywhere. And so I am working within, and I am not saying this on behalf of LinkedIn, I'm saying this on my own personal behalf, one of the most closed data ecosystems that exists with regard to labor market information. And yet I think I have made small progress in opening it up, in sharing principles around open data and open more generally. And everybody should just be aware that in almost any role that exists related to technology or data, there is a way to make it more open.
I actually think that dovetails into, I'm kind of combining a bunch of questions I've been seeing in the chat, which is, okay, once you get your foot in the door and you're now in, and you're a passionate advocate for open data, and you're trying to find a way to bring about open data, potentially in organizations that don't necessarily have it as a core philosophy, how do you help embed that open data philosophy in the work that you're doing within the context of organizations that don't necessarily have it as a central value? I feel like that's actually a really big question that we could have a panel just on that question.
Maybe you wanna, I mean, I'm really happy to speak to that, but I don't know if you want to feel like moderating and want to call on people. So I think, you know, like culture change is really, really hard. And, you know, I've worked in a lot of organizations that are not very collaborative, and potentially very hierarchical, and potentially very sort of, you know, like maybe not bought in. And part of it is finding allies and pockets where you can start doing the thing, and like almost showcasing, like leadering in sort of openness and open data, and being more open, and kind of inviting people to get involved and follow because it's fun. I think that's one way. I think getting sort of obviously sort of buy-in, working with external groups to bring sort of external pressure potentially, to sort of maybe publish more open data or be more they're all good tactics.
Thanks, Ira. Any other thoughts from the panels? Okay, I am looking at the time and I'm thinking like, okay, moderating on the spot, how do we make sure we get everything we need to get through within this time, which is of course not possible. So here's my proposal to the group. We only have 5 minutes left, and I want to give people a chance to start doing some closing thoughts, as well as I have a couple things for everybody in terms of where we're going next with the Canadian Open Data Society related to this topic, which will easily take the 5 minutes. So here's my proposal. Keep writing your questions in. I will email these questions to the panelists. We'll see if we can curate some responses, and I'll send an email out to everybody with, you know, all the questions that have been asked, and with the responses to those questions. And that way, it allows us to live beyond the 5 minutes without going beyond the 5 minutes. So keep putting the questions in the chat, and we will get back to them in an email format in the future. Okay, so I want to sort of go back to the panelists and sort of give you a chance to have sort of closing thought, 1 minute closing thought on like, what is sort of one final message you would give to everybody here about building a career in open data based on your experience? If you had to leave people with a final thought of something tangible, practical they can do today, tomorrow, this week, this coming month to really help them build their career, what would that piece of advice be?
Okay, I'm going to go in really quick. So my advice is always, believe it or not, storytelling is something that is often overlooked when it comes to the world of data. But really, being able to tangibly demonstrate the story, the narrative, the people that you're serving, what the intention is, how you're doing this public good, by doing this type of work. So whether that's through data visualization, those are all other key skills as well. But that storytelling piece and that data visualization piece are two really key integral skills I would emphasize.
Thanks, Al. Michael, do you want to go next?
Yeah, so I know for us, I don't think, I can give advice in terms of the people that we hire, and we care about people that care about, the idea that how matters, that people that are going to be detail oriented and that are just engaged in this work. We have a hard time kind of convincing people that do interviews, be like, tell us what you hate, tell us what gives you frustration, and what jagged edges you'd like to see smoothed over just for your own personal satisfaction. So those are the kind of interests that we're looking for. And obviously not everyone can do a lot of time volunteering, but just showing that you've done something about your interest and engage in it in a detail-oriented way.
Thanks, Michael. Ira?
So I feel like I talked about this a fair amount in my little bit. So maybe I was just I was looking at all the other questions, and someone asked a really good question about how do you kind of deal with ethical issues working in open data. So I thought, like, hey, why not? I'll just sort of make up something for that. And I think this is a really important question, like thinking about ethics. And I know there's like been a lot of, well, maybe we'll have a chief ethical officer or something else. And really, for me, like ethics, it needs to be thinking about what the organization is doing, what are you trying to do, what are the constraints, and what's the driver. And because ultimately, you either have regulation that constrains you and keeps you honest, or you have sort of drivers of maybe people's behavior or understanding of your brand that also keeps you honest. But if you have neither of those, then it's really difficult to do something. So I think open data is a really powerful potential motivator to increase ethical behavior, because it can shine a light of transparency on what's happening, but only if that data is used and good enough. I think there is a lot of kind of worries of, open data washing, people kind of going through the motions of publishing stuff. Data just because it exists doesn't mean it's true, doesn't mean it connects to anything. There's also a lot of people using open data to actually reinforce power imbalances, which I think actually when we're thinking about publishing using open data needs to be a consideration of actually who is this empowering, and can we empower people with less power, and what are the consequences. And obviously you should not ever publish personal information as open data. So private data is not open data, and those two things are very separate. So that's fine.
Brilliant, thank you. Again, just a reminder, put your questions in the chat. We'll come to them in an email format in a future date. Thank you so much for joining us today. Some final things from us. So one thing that I will put in the email that we'll send out to everybody as well is that looking at creating a jobs board for open data jobs in Canada, something that we're really keen at doing in the Canadian Open Data Society. So if that's something that you are interested in being a part of and helping us create, please send me an email. You can reply in the email that I will send out. And we have some upcoming webinars, so I'm going to pass over to Richard to talk about our next webinar that we have coming, and then we'll wrap. Richard, go ahead.
A little bit in the spirit of what Val was just saying a moment ago about creating more stories in government, the next webinar is exactly that. It's storytelling for government and open data. And if you'll indulge me, here's sort of the write-up and the summary for that webinar. In 2003, Luc Jacquet spent 13 months in one of the most desolate and miserable places on earth. While there, he produced an 80-minute international sensation that would go on to win dozens of awards, including an Academy Award, and gross over $127 million worldwide. His creation was a documentary about the mating habits of penguins in Antarctica. March of the Penguins demonstrated that you can take any subject, no matter how boring it may seem on the surface, and turn it into a compelling story. And it is the time we all learn a lesson from Mr. Jacquet and begin to tell the stories about the heroes who are changing our government. In this session, you will learn the basics of storytelling, such as a 3-act structure. You will be introduced to free tools such as fade-in, and you will see how open data sets can be used as inspiration. You will even get the chance to write your own plot summary for a fictional government story. Join us on December 10th, 2020, and bring the power of storytelling to government.
Excellent. I'm very excited for that. I'm excited to see how I can have my very own March of the Penguins. But yes, we'll send more information out about the upcoming webinar that Richard's going to be hosting in a couple of weeks in the email that I will aim to send out by the end of this week. Actually, no, let's do, let's not get overly ambitious. I'll send it out early next week. Let's not go crazy. And please, if you have questions, put in the chat. We will follow up with those questions. Thank you so much to the panelists for making time today and sharing their stories and their advice with all of us. Jake, thank you for coming and helping moderate and helping us get the ball going on this. Everybody, thank you so much for making time out of your day. Yes, all the best. Happy American Thanksgiving. Have a great weekend and look forward to an email from us soon. Thank you, everyone.
Go Open Data Canada.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
Ciao.
Everyone.